Welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games, just minutes after playing them. My name's Adam.
This is Chris.
And this is Tim.
And today we're going to give our hot take about the board game we just finished playing, AuZtralia.
Before we jump into a description of the game, I wanted to first call out that we recently held a contest, a drawing, to win a full pledge of Frosthaven from Cephalofair Games. We drew that on May 1st, so I just wanted to announce the winner on here. For this contest, we took everybody that follows us on Twitter, everybody that follows us on Facebook, everyone that shared one of our posts about this contest, as well as everybody that's left us a review on Apple Podcasts. I made a big old spreadsheet of all of those entries and then used a random number generator and picked one of them. One of our Twitter followers is the person who won. That Twitter follower was Scott P. over on Twitter. So we reached out to Scott and he gave us his mailing address. And so we're going to have that pledge of Frosthaven shipped directly to him. So congratulations, Scott. Thanks for following us. If any of you listening are not currently following us on social media, Twitter's where we're most active. So please follow us on Twitter if you've got a Twitter account at BG_hot takes. If you are on Facebook, follow us on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. We're not quite as active there, but we are keeping you updated when we've got new episodes dropping and occasionally a little bit of chatter on our group there. It's fun to interact with people that are listening to us. We'll keep you updated when new shows are happening, but also in the future, if we do other contests like this, we may draw from existing followers, so you have a chance to win something. All right, with all of that said, let's jump into a description of AuZtralia. AuZtralia is set in an alternate reality 1930s where groups of explorers set out to explore and settle the previously undiscovered continent of Australia. But the existing inhabitants, the Great Old Ones, cosmic horrors from H.P. Lovecraft's horror mythos, have a different idea and will try to push you back to the sea, blighting your farms and conquering your ports. The game board is a hex-filled map of southeastern Australia. Each player will start with a port at one coastal edge of the map. On their turn, players will take one of 9 actions on their player board by placing an action token there. If they place an action token on a space that already has an action token, they will have to pay a gold for each token already there, along with whatever the normal costs are. The actions include building railroads between hexes, mining by taking the resources off of a hex that is connected to their port by railroad, building farms which produce gold and are worth endgame points, buying military units with gold, recruiting personality cards from a set of face-up cards, each with a different one-time or ongoing ability, trading goods, attacking an old one, or retrieving all of their action cubes previously placed. Each of these actions cost a number of units of time, which is tracked on the outside edge of the board, and whenever a player is in the back of the time tracker, they will take their turn, so it's possible for one player to take several turns in a row if the other players have taken bigger actions that move them several spaces forward on the time tracker. Once all players have moved past a certain spot on the time tracker, then the Great Old Ones awaken and will start taking turns as well. Their turn consists of triggering events like activating monsters or eliminating recruits from the market, and will always take movement actions which will move the monsters around the board towards the player's farms and ports. If a monster reaches a player's farm, it will blight it, removing the endgame points from the player who owns the farm and turning it into endgame points for the old ones. Players can try to stop these encroaching horrors by buying military units and sending them to attack the old ones on hexes near their railway. Different military units will be stronger against different types of old ones, but combat is resolved by flipping cards over that will show what types of units or monsters are doing physical or sanity damage. If a monster is destroyed, the player will count it for endgame points, but if a player loses all sanity or all units in a combat, then the player is defeated and the monster can continue its approach. The game ends when a monster reaches a player's port and is not destroyed, or when all players have reached a certain point on the time tracker. The old ones get points for undefeated monsters and blighted farms, and players will get points for defeated monsters, remaining farms, some personality cards, and certain types of resources. If the old ones have the highest score, all players lose the game. Otherwise, the player with the most points is the winner. AuZtralia was designed by Martin Wallace and is published by Stronghold Games. All right, so let's jump into the conversation. Let's start with gameplay and mechanisms of AuZtralia. This was a first play for all of us tonight. So first plays are always interesting because you really just don't have a grasp on the strategy, how to play. And this game was particularly quirky, I thought. It did some things that were very unique, that were kind of hard to suss out as you're just starting up the game. But why don't we start with you, Chris? Anything that you thought was particularly interesting about the mechanisms tonight?
Hey, before I jump into the mechanisms, I actually had a question. I've read as much as I can find to read about the game, including the color commentary in the manual, and I still don't understand why it's called AuZtralia.
Because there's zombies in it. So they put a big old Z in the middle of it.
Oh, well, that was what I thought at
That's it.
first. I'm like, that's you always add a Z whenever there's zombies involved, but zombies weren't like the major,
Yep.
anyway.
No, they weren't, but there was for some reason, and I don't even know, are zombies even in the Cthulhu mythos at all? Like they talk about them just being reanimated humans to do the work for them. So I think what
Yeah.
somebody did was took the Cthulhu mythos and then said, let's drop zombies into it.
Reanimator.
And that's where the Z came in.
Reanimator was Lovecraft, yeah.
Okay, got it.
The
There you go.
80s horror movie was based on a Lovecraft story.
Nice. I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so back to the topic at hand. Man, there was so much to talk about in this game. I mean, so many things happening, and it did so many interesting things, I thought. First of all, we talked about with the description, this is a really interesting and unusual combination of combat and area control and resource management and track building and trains, and I mean it does a whole lot of different things. And I'll start by just saying that I'm curious to hear what you guys thought about kind of this melange of stuff that it threw together into one big package.
I thought it was a giant quirk of interesting items, sort of to echo your sentiment, Chris. I enjoyed it. Surprisingly, I enjoyed it. I think you're around the southeastern coast of Australia. You pick a port, and that's kind of where you start your train station. So you're like, oh, okay, this is a train station. We're going to build some train track and get some resources. That's pretty normal. Okay, all of a sudden, there's a freaking Shoggoth that's going to come in and attack my train tracks and try to crush my farm. Yeah, so I'm building a farm now too. And then there's like some gold and some iron. So there's all these just elements coming in and monsters on top of that. So it's fun, it's whimsical, and it's a pretty fun game. And not to give impressions in the first segment of the show and then talk about the mechanisms later, but that's what just happened, I think. Tim, what do you have to say about this game?
Well, just let's start with the placement of the port. So that's always interesting when you got to make a decision at the beginning of the game for what's going to kick off your strategy. In this game, your placement is really important because and it's going to change game to game, but there's a whole bunch of random kind of tiles that are seeded for setup, and you flip them over and it tells you where resources are and where monsters are going to be and stuff like that. So the board layout can change every game. In this particular game, what was interesting, we didn't really kind of discover this until we were playing through half the game, is that it looked like a lot of the monsters were going to attack. They were more likely to attack kind of the south side of the board, because typically when Cthulhu is attacking, when he takes an event action, you flip over the lowest numbered token that's out there. So if you haven't cleared away a lot of those lower number tokens, those ones are going to flip over and they're going to start moving down south. Okay, let's go back way to a classic too, Settlers of Catan, or what's currently called Catan, the game formerly known as Settlers of Catan, I guess. Let's go there. But in that game, basically the most important decision you can make in the whole game is where you place your first building, because it might be on a space that gives you the best odds for all the dice rolls. And I really don't love that decision in most games, but in this game, what we found was really interesting is that even though it seemed like Adam was set up for failure because his port was closest to all of those monsters that were going to start moving in, that's also how he got almost all of his points. He was able to, start to defeat them. Some of his farms got blighted and they got wiped out, but he ended up killing like 8 or 9 monsters. Well, Chris and I are up in the far east, northeast corner of the, port. We started there because, there was some like juicy resources, but there wasn't a ton. So Steve and Adam are down on the south. They got more resources available and they got more monsters to attack. Me and Chris, we had a lot of farms by the end of the game, but we really didn't have much as far as resources we could mine. We didn't have many monsters to go after. So it's an interesting decision every time, but what's really funny is that even if we'd known how it was going to play out, I think we would have thought the far north was going to be more desirable, but it turns out not necessarily, because all those monsters get you a lot of points. Dealing with that mechanism specifically, I think it's going to change every game. What's the most useful, and you got to assess that at the beginning of the game, but it seemed fairly balanced, even though it didn't feel like it. I think it turns out that it actually is pretty balanced.
Another mechanism that I wanted to talk about, and I think it's really central to the whole game, and it really colored my view of the game, is the way that the turns proceed. And that is, one of the basic turn mechanism is time, and each action that you can take during your turn comes with a time cost. And there's 8 different actions you can take: building a railroad, mining in your location, building farms, and several other things. And each one, you move up a time track based on what it is you decide to do. And the bigger, more impactful move that you make, the more time it takes, and the more farther you move up the time track. That ends up deciding how the turns run. So if you take a big move and say move up 3 on the time track, you're going to be way ahead of everybody else, and it may be 2 or 3 turns for other people before it actually comes back to you again. And that was something I'm not sure I loved it. You guys had mentioned a couple of other games that do something similar, and I found it to be, it was not my favorite mechanism. I saw it and I can understand it was a little bit different. It was interesting, but I didn't love it.
What didn't you like about it, Chris? Was it that waiting for other turns, or just the feeling that was you were giving up too much for doing a good action? Like why do you think you didn't like it?
It was a combination of the two. I mean, the latter, I guess I could say, it's a choice, right? I mean, it's a choice that you take to move yourself ahead and take that big action. But it really did at some points feel like, okay, I just took a big action. I'm going to go get a snack because it's going to be 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes before I take my next turn while these guys all do a couple things, especially once the monsters get involved. And then you got to factor the monster in there too. And it just, honestly, it started to drag a little bit for me at that point. So, but the other piece of it, I didn't enjoy it as much. The decision is much about, do I want to give up taking a turn in order to have this big turn? I don't mind, losing a resource or spending more. I didn't like having it affect the order of my turn.
Yeah, it did feel very penalizing to take one of those big farming actions where you're giving up 3 actions, or you take a big attack action and you move several types of units in there. You're gonna give up several actions. Yeah,
right.
Thematically it's very clever. That essentially, like, depending on what you're gonna do is gonna dictate how long that's gonna take for you to do that action before you can do something else. The other thing about, the kind of the delay, most of the actions that took less time were very simple. And so when somebody was just taking an action that did one move, usually they moved really quickly. So if you took an action that moved you 3 spaces ahead and everybody else took a couple that did, 1, they were kind of flipping through pretty quickly. But I can understand that, and there were some turns, like an attack with only one type of unit, that could take a while. And somebody trying to decide what card they wanted to recruit from the row, that could take a while. So there were definitely some actions that took a little bit longer as well. Interesting, because I actually really like that. The other game that I've played that I can think of offhand that does that is Uwe Rosenberg's Patchwork. And I think it's a very clever mechanism. It's a sacrifice you're making by taking a better tile, and that means the other person has some more movement times to go. Are there any other games that do that? I feel like there's one other game we've played frequently that does something similar, Adam, but I can't think of what it is.
Brass does it, another Martin Wallace game. Brass Birmingham is a little bit similar, where the more money you spend, so whoever spends the least money goes first in turn order. So that's, you can go from going first one round to going fourth next round. So it'll be like forever between your turns in that game too.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chris, I was getting that same vibe, like you said, especially when the monsters start taking their turns. You could be the person going, and then you'll build 3 farms and be way up ahead of everybody. And then there's at least 4 people that are going to go before you get to go, and maybe more if there's gaps between those people and when it's your turn. So you could be sitting there for 7, 8 turns before you're up again. And that started to drag a little bit. So you got to be ready. You got to have your burrito getting ready in the microwave. You got to time that just right.
I was just going to say, it's a perfect time to go fill your beer and use the restroom, though. So at least
exactly.
Yeah,
so
seriously, tuck your kid in. Or
it's not like Space Base where you got to be paying attention the whole time or you're going to miss something.
Yeah, if you have your breaks planned out.
I will admit that it really did add an interesting strategic element to it, because there's some circumstances where you may have a couple of actions that you want to take, and you choose to take one that's shorter because maybe that puts you where you get to take 2 turns in a row, and that can be a really rewarding thing. And so I think I can see the value of it, but I think it really does come down to, you either like it or you don't like it. It's a love it or hate it kind of mechanism, and I just didn't happen to like it in this game.
So along those lines, and you touched on it, Tim, was the kind of the combat. Let's talk about that for a little bit. I liked how if you used one type of unit for combat, occasionally 2. There was no penalties for Zeppelin or the armored train, I think it was called. So if you sent all homogeneous styles of combat unit to go fight these monsters, that only cost you 1 time point. So I thought that was kind of neat. You could send 3 or 4 types of unit in and maybe have a better chance of wiping out the monsters. But in my case, specifically, I was just fighting mostly zombies or Migos. I don't know what the actual zombies were called. Anyway, those type of monsters were least effective against infantry, which I happen to have tons of infantry the whole time. So I was just sending those guys out to just beat up these monsters, and at only the cost of 1 time per combat. So that kind of worked out in my favor.
The combat's really interesting here because, like you said, you both saved time by sending one type of unit, but also when they hit, then they hit however many, a multiplier of how many guys you had there. On the swing side, though, there are some monsters that could have come up randomly that you could have had to fight that infantry would have been completely useless against.
Yeah.
And so you could have ended up getting just walked all over and really not, been prepared for it. So it's a really interesting challenge. Like, you did set yourself up well and you managed to focus on infantry. You got lucky to kind of be able to use those. But there could definitely be a game where you're like, oh, that strategy worked really well for me this game. And then the next time you just get run over and your port gets taken because you just aren't prepared at all to deal with the other monsters. So it's an interesting push and pull. When I was setting myself up for combat, I never did that. I never bought more than one, purchase of a type of unit. And then, yeah, they're not as powerful when they do attack. But at the same time, I generally had a decent spread. So whatever came at me, I managed to kind of protect myself from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was really interesting how they drew the cards as the mechanism for making the combat happen. Instead of rolling dice, you drew the card, and then it would give you the results of a particular action. If you matched up the units that you had involved, and I thought that was a really neat way to handle that.
Yeah, it's super clever system, really easy that you basically, during every combat, you flip over one card, you look at what unit you're fighting, and it tells you whether they're hitting you or whether you're getting hit. Super easy to read, quick and painless to deal with. And then also is a multi-use card, so when you did the monster movement, you still flipped over the same cards, and there was a different iconography that showed you whether the monster moved or not. I like that system a lot. Adam, what did you think about it? I had mentioned it while we were playing that I liked it a lot more than like dice combat, even though it's essentially doing something very similar. But how did you feel about the card flipping?
I didn't mind it. I'm kind of indifferent. I thought it worked well for this game. It's pretty quick and snappy, and I think again on subsequent plays it'd just be boom, 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 flipping these cards. And there's a lot of times in the combat where you did have the choice to withdraw. And for me, I was just like, let's duke it out. If either I'm going to win or lose. I don't care about withdrawing. So you could just flip cards until somebody won or lost. There was one case where Steve, I think he was the only person to withdraw from any kind of combat. So, if you were going to like kind of deliberate between each card flip, it could add some time to the whole thing. But if it's just like, all right, let's just do this until somebody dies, then it's just flip, 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 damn, who's getting damage, who's losing sanity, and then you're done. Mm-hmm. So it's quick and snappy, and yeah, you know what? I did really like that. It was pretty nice.
Yeah.
I think another interesting thing is that they do use, so you can lose a combat by just having all your units get killed, or you can withdraw, but also that you can become insane. And it's, a perfect fit with the kind of Cthulhu mythos that, you can just lose your sanity. It didn't happen to us in this game, but we also, we never faced off. Cthulhu never showed up in this game. And, so maybe we just didn't manage to hit the right monsters or just got some lucky rolls against it. But I kind of like that there's an alternate, like, lose condition. Even if you got the strongest military and you're not getting hit by the monster, you can still lose just by them driving you insane. It's kind of a fun, like alternate that you have to watch for and worry about. We were close a couple times. We, a couple of us got lost 3 of our sanity. If we'd hit one more, we would.
Yeah, I came close a couple times, but hung in there.
Kind of fun.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen at least one person go out like that. It seems like something that should happen a little bit more often in that kind of combat. And Tim, I wanted to, you said something about the multi-use cards. I thought that was actually really cool because those cards are doing a lot of stuff. They're controlling the combat, not only just in terms of hit or miss, but hit or miss with different kinds of units, the moving of the units, that kind of thing. The one thing that really kind of threw me, though, it seemed very unintuitive to me, was how these units were almost identical to each other. An armored car had as much armor as an infantryman. And that part, and I think the same as a Zeppelin, is the same as all the units had very similar attributes to them. I think there could have been a way to make them a little bit more unique. So, for example, have one that has more armor but less of an attack power to it, or something like that. Because I felt like, other than the fact that, let's say, for example, artillery is better against Cthulhu than an infantryman because they're more likely to hit on the cards. Other than that, there didn't seem to be a lot of difference between the different units.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they were trying to go for there. Our infantrymen were better against zombies and, like the smaller guys, basically. And if you had fought more big guys, like the Shoggoth's artillery is better against them. They didn't end up going towards Adam's side of the board at all, so he was protected. But if you'd had the armored cars, they would have been a lot stronger than infantrymen. So there was a difference, but I totally hear what you're saying, Chris. It did feel a little strange that 2 damage on an infantry knocked him out, and 2 damage on an armored car knocked him out, and 2 damage on a artillery knocked it out. That seemed a little strange.
Yeah, the combat here is nothing special. It's very streamlined and it's quick. And I don't think the point of the game is to have an amazing combat system or anything like that. It's quick and relatively simple and light. So I think for this game, for this context, I didn't mind it. But yeah, it does lack kind of differentiation, and you're not going to really specialize too much in different types of combat. I think it works well in this game, but it wasn't like the most complex combat system out there.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say related to that combat and the uniqueness of like how the different units were better against the different monsters, I think that this is one of those things that's going to make it hard for someone playing for the first time to grasp what's a good strategy to go towards. They do have player aids, or at least, when we played on Tabletop Simulator and the mod had player aids with it, I assume it comes in the game. It kind of showed you which units were better against which monsters. But that's really important to pay attention to. But also it can be totally random luck. If you happen to build up some specific unit and then the next monster that gets turned over and starts headed your way is a unit that's not good with those, that's a little random. But there were a couple other decisions too that were hard to grok on a first, like reading the rules, getting taught the rules, like knowing what to do at the beginning of the game was very unintuitive, I think. After a play or two, I think it's easy. And I felt by the end of the game, we probably would all be ready to jump into a second one and kind of know how to at least think about the strategy, even if we don't get it right. That's a little hard. Like if you played this game a few times and then you taught it to somebody new, you'd have just a significant advantage, I think, from the previous knowledge and some of the things you have to know to be successful at the game. What about the recruit cards? What do you guys think about those? This is the row of cards at the top where you can spend a time point and an action to essentially recruit one of these cards. And they can be a one-time use card, or they can be an ongoing effect, or they can be endgame scoring, or once per combat.
I'll jump in here since Chris is finishing off a nut or something.
It was a pretzel.
Chris is always snacking while we're recording a podcast.
I thought the recruit cards, again, I think this is something that on more and more plays, you'll see the advantage of specific recruit cards. But on an initial play, they all seemed a little bit tame to me. There's a couple that stood out as being like, oh man, that one's pretty rad. I'm going to use this one and get this cool stuff. But they did seem a little bit tame on a first play. I could see, again, how some might be super specialized. You're like, oh, I'm waiting for this guy because I'm going to set this up and grab this guy when he pops out and then waste everybody. I used a couple to help me out occasionally, but there was nothing really explosive, just kind of a nice supplement to a particular strategy, but nothing that really changed the course of the game. What about you, Chris? Any thoughts on that now that you're done with that pretzel?
It's funny. I definitely, I see what you're saying. I felt very different about it. I felt the exact opposite. I thought that they really kind of threw some interesting combos into there. I think in one row there was one character who gave you instant access to multiple resources. And this is a very resource limited game. It's not like you can just go out and do 10 different things that'll get you iron or coal or gold. You really have to kind of plan ahead what you're going to need and go for it. And you had some characters in the row that gave you instant resources. You had other characters who gave you pretty powerful benefits in combat. You had some that were heavily defensive. There was in this game you're trying to protect your farms and you're trying to protect your port, and you had some characters who did automatic damage if an enemy were to attack your ports. And then there were some that were straight points. So there was all these different things that were happening with the cards. I think one thing I can see what you were saying that kind of hit me was it really does depend on, you have to know the game a little bit. And we didn't really know the game, and so maybe didn't really fully appreciate what those cards would do. But I think if I had played a few games of this and I could look at it and say, oh yeah, I see what that card's for. And then you can sort of tailor your strategy more around the cards you're able to get.
Yeah, I agree with Chris on that. I would disagree, Adam, that they weren't that impactful. I think I won the game because of two recruit cards that I had, maybe all three of them. Like one of them was the one that let me defend my farms by starting a combat whenever my farm got attacked. And I used it like 4 or 5 times that I just, if I didn't have that, I would have been completely blighted. I probably would have lost my port and I would have lost the game and the game would have ended a lot sooner. But because of that one card, it completely changed what I could do that game. I also bought the one that gave me +1 point for the cattle farms. And so I just focused. The rest of the game was like getting into hills and building up cattle farms. So I got like 4 or 5 points from that guy. And then I had another one that let me do an automatic damage every time I got into a combat. And that, especially combined with the one that let me defend my farms, it just gave me a really nice, combat advantage just from those few cards there. So I thought the cards were really cool. I think that's one of the things that's going to really add variety to the game on repeated plays because they're going to come up in different orders. You may never see them. And, just depending on what monsters are up and kind of how you've started to develop your strategy when they come up, I think it gives that fun, like, hey, I get to try to make the best of what I've got. And Chris is right. There were some of those, and I used one once, but some of those where they just gave you a few resources, and that doesn't seem that big of a deal. But if you think about it, like, for example, I got one that gave me 2 gold, a coal, and an iron. And it just cost me 1 time point. There's nothing else in the game that you can get 4 resources, especially with 2 gold for 1 time point. So pretty significant jump in resources that basically like let me do 2 more turns without having to get more resources first. So all of those, I think if you just find them and use them at the right time, I think they were all really cool and interesting. And I'm sure some are stronger and some are weaker, but they're situational, and that makes it fun to me. So I think without those cards there, it would have been a little bit less interesting game.
Did you have a lot of cards, Adam? I couldn't remember if you had leaned into the cards at all. How many did you have? Did you have a bunch?
Well, I'm going to hypocrite myself here, or I'm going to contradict myself here. I had two of those cards, and one of them was if a bad guy attacks my farm, he gets 2 damage instantly, which helped out a little. And then I had another one that let me remove a damage on one of my units in combat. Those helped out a lot. And Steve had the card that gave an additional point per dead bad guy at the end of the game. And that would have given me 7 or 8 extra points. And that would have given me the game. So maybe, if I didn't think all those cards were super tame up there, I would have bought a few more and won the game.
By the way, you just called them bad guys. I think it just depends. It's perspective. It's a matter of perspective.
Right? Maybe some people are pulling for the purple team to win. Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to ask you guys what you thought about there's a point in the game where the bad guys, where the monsters come out and they start attacking. Before that, you can attack them, but they can't move. They can't attack you back. They're not really doing anything. And then there comes a point where that all changes, that they start moving, they start attacking, they start spawning. Did you guys feel like there was a big change in the gameplay once that happened?
Yeah, I did. And it was interesting. There was a tension point where at the beginning, we felt like we were doing everything we could with our time to get some defenses built up and stuff like that. Once that changed, the game definitely changed a bit. In this one play, the tension didn't stay consistent throughout the rest of the game. Games like this typically, you get to that point and then it starts to get bad and then it gets worse and it gets worse. And I think with the right card draws, it could have happened like that. Like we could have ended up just getting slammed with a bunch of monsters getting turned over in a couple turns. In this particular play, it didn't happen that aggressively. And by the end of the game, we really weren't even getting impacted at all by the monsters. And so maybe that just changes game to game. And I actually thought that was okay because we finally, it's settled. We managed to take care of all the monsters. And then we got to focus on our economics again before the game ended. And that was actually kind of fun to not just be stressed out and just barely surviving the whole game. But I bet there's games where if the card draw came up differently and different monsters came up, that you could just feel like run down and just barely surviving most of the game. So I thought it did change things. I think it could have changed more, but I bet that's going to just vary a little bit depending on how things come up.
Yeah, what did you think about that, Adam?
Yeah, this game did feel a little cozy at the end as we were getting a handle on the situation. And I don't know if this is a Martin Wallace hallmark, but at least in Brass Birmingham and Brass Lancashire, you have the 2 phases of the game where you clear the canal and you kind of start
Yeah.
a whole kind of second half of the game. And it's a little bit different, a little bit twist on the first half of the game. So again, once you catch up to that purple marker, in this case for the bad guys, that's when it kind of shifts and those guys start coming after and being more active rather than just passive sitting there. So kind of neat.
Yeah, that definitely felt a lot like Brass Birmingham, the way that there was kind of two phases in the game. Although the second phase did feel like it lasted a lot longer. Almost to the point I would say that it dragged a little bit at the end.
I would agree. Yeah.
I think the game could end sooner. In fact, it almost did, and I'll get to that point in a little bit. But it definitely could have ended sooner with some slightly different luck. But I did feel like it started to drag at the end. It went on just a little bit longer than it should have. That being said, though, it is an interesting comparison to Brass because you've got the rail building and you've got the resource management, some of the same types of resources. You got the double phases. This really feels like he kind of said, hey, I'll take Brass. It's a very popular game. Everybody loves it, and kind of put a spin on it. I love the spin on it. I think it was thematically super, interesting and fun. And I thought that it just did things that were more unique. I would almost say after one play, and I've had 2 plays of Brass Birmingham, that this is my preferred of the 2 Martin Wallace train games that I've played. And I know Brass Birmingham is much, more respected and loved. But from a theme perspective and from just like a fun perspective, I think I would come back to AuZtralia, at least after one play, before saying I really want to go back to Brass, even though I really liked Brass. So giving a little information away there, but as a comparison, I think it's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, I want to say something about that because honestly, I think this almost killed the game for me. I felt like that unevenness really affected my impression of this game. And this, I got to tell you, this is a game that I went into just wanting to love so bad. But then we got to that point where, at the outset, there's monsters all over the board. You're attacking them. There's some combat. It's kind of, we kind of introduced to the combat mechanism. And then I was ready for all hell to break loose when the monsters came out and started moving. I mean, I was excited about that. And then sure enough, that happened. And there was probably 3 or 4 rounds where, the monsters just started, we were drawing these cards. The monsters are moving all over the place and were trashing us. I mean, there was a couple of rounds where, I think there were 6 movement cards were drawn and the monsters were all over the place, killing us. And then, we would attack them, wipe them all out. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, now what? Now I was actually hoping to find a way. I was hoping monsters are going to spawn because I wanted to attack them so I could get the points, or I wanted to add some more of that, kind of flavor back into the game. But then it felt like a good, half hour or so was just, okay, monsters are all dead now. Let's just keep, building railroads and putting more farms. And I just, that kind of lost me. And part of that too, this is another thing where I felt like, things were simplified in a way that maybe makes the game more accessible, but at the same time loses some complexity and interest to me, was the farms. So farms are a point maker. Basically what they do is that if you put a farm down, it's end game scoring, and it could be end game scoring for you, or if the monsters blight your farm, then it's end game scoring for them. But it seemed strange to me that there's 3 kinds of farms, and it makes absolutely no difference what kind you build. The only difference is that in different terrains you can build different farms. So I guess there's a limitation there that makes it so you can't just build any farm anywhere you want. But you have sheep farms, corn farms, cow farms, and you didn't get any resources out of them. It was just points, and it didn't really matter what you built. So the combination of going back to the straight economic part of the game at the end, when I found the economic part of the game to be the slightly weaker part, well, really let me down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get that feeling, Chris. That especially in this game, the direction that it went, kind of the tempo where the game ended, it was not that exciting or an appealing way for the game to end. I disagree with you a little bit on the farms, and that I think that because it restricted that you could only build one of each type of farm on a turn, it really made you have to set yourself up to optimize on those. So you had to build extra rail, which is a very expensive and time-intensive action to get yourself set up to take advantage of 3 farms in a turn and kind of benefit from that. So it did take a little bit of setting and planning. setup and planning. And then also there were some of the cards, the recruit cards that gave you special bonuses for certain types of farms, like I mentioned. So with those in play, there were opportunities to say, like, I really need to focus on this thing. But I get it. And, that was one of the main ways that you could get gold in the game as well. You had to use those to get gold, which was important to buy units.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going on there, and they all blended together. I do think, though, that it did suffer this game because we just weren't dealing with the pressure from the monsters at the end, that it just felt like, hey, this isn't that interesting to be doing at this point in the game. So totally agree with that. I think if the game had ended early in one of those big moments where we almost got crushed, where ports almost got taken out, it probably would have been a more like appealing overall feel of the game, and it wouldn't have gone on as long and dragged on as long. I think, though, that is probably my biggest, I'll say it's a criticism because I think it deserves it, because I think it's going to set you up for some bad plays. This game it's very random how the game's going to go. And in one way, it's going to make every game feel a little bit different, I think, because of the variable setup and the different types of monsters that can come up and the different cards that are going to come up. This game is going to play one time like an aggressive, like you're just going to get beat up by monsters all the time. And other times it's going to be a little bit mellow and more just like focusing on economics and points and stuff like that. And I don't think that's a good thing, because I think it sets you up for an expectation that isn't always going to happen. And then beyond that, there is just so much randomness in what can happen on the board. Like the way the monsters come out. Adam just got slammed the whole time. And luckily he was able to deal with all those monsters with his infantry. And so he took a very close second place and could have easily gotten first. But at the same level, he could have been down there, just the wrong monsters came up, and he could have just gotten slammed just completely by the luck of where he placed his port and then where they started moving. Like there were a lot of times where monsters could have gone to Steve's farms, but they just, by the random luck of the draw, they went to Adam's farms, and he could have just gotten piled on. So I think luck and just the randomness, both in setup and some of the things that are happening with the monsters, are going to really dictate whether this is a fun experience or it's like a completely frustrating experience. And I think either one could happen out of this game because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things. Again, I'm going to contradict myself and say that's where the card row was nice. I was able to see those monsters coming and prepare for that to kind of hedge my farms a little bit. And the second thing, is this a kind of game where you guys would apply some house rules so that you have a similar mix of monsters coming out every time to apply that kind of challenge and pressure? Or, would you just cope with the variability, or would you do something to kind of reduce that variability and make somewhat of a homogeneous gameplay from game to game to game?
Nope, I would just cope with it.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, the question is how often is it a bad experience? And again, personally, I had a really fun time with this experience tonight, even though it didn't necessarily meet expectations at the end of the game. And I think on a future play, it probably wouldn't have felt like it dragged as much either, because we'd probably be pushing the end game more. We would be, like maybe optimizing where we're getting more farms out early, spreading across the board. Mm-hmm. We would have pushed the time faster. We would have gotten more aggressive going in after those monsters, because there was a ton of resources up in the northwest corner of the board that we never even mined, so like obviously we could have done a lot more that we didn't do on our first play. We probably had a slower start off than we could. So I think there's a lot that could come out of subsequent plays that might change the whole feeling of that. And I think I'd play it a few times and say, hey, this continues to not be fun for me, or this is fun all the time, even though it could lead itself to frustration. I think I'd either be like, it's frustrating so often that I'm just not going to play it anymore, or it's rarely frustrating and I just know to expect that and I'll play it like this. I would probably never house rule, to answer your question.
How variable is the setup, and how finicky or fiddly is the setup to do?
Yeah, the setup is very fiddly. So that is definitely a potential issue here. You seed the board with a bunch of these upside down tiles, and then you flip them over, and it tells you, it's got arrows pointing to different corners of this hex, and it tells you whether to put resources there or monsters or a combination. And then if you have two tiles that are facing the same direction, and you put monsters from both of them, then you go an upgraded level on the monster. So that could have happened. It didn't happen this time. So we probably started with weaker monsters than you could have. And then you have to set up the event deck, which is 3 different phases, weaker, and then so you separate those into 3 different piles, shuffle them, and then put the event deck together. So there's definitely a lot of setup here. It's pretty fiddly.
Okay.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say about the randomness of it, and I agree with you, Tim, that is kind of an issue with this game. But I think one of the things is that there is so much about it that's random that it almost became difficult to plan for in some circumstances. And
Yeah.
I'll use a circumstance that happened with me, and this is not just sour grapes. I mean, I'm sure I could have done something better. And I will also caveat this with I've only played one game of it, so maybe this would not happen frequently. But for example, when the monster comes out and you get 6 movement cards. Well, 6 movement cards can bring that monster halfway across the board. So that monster can be almost anywhere within one turn. And there was a scenario where a monster came out, and the monsters are random. You don't know what you're attacking, but I attacked a monster. And it turned out that the random monster that popped up happened to be one that I didn't have any units that could fight against that kind of monster. So I spent the next 3 or 4 rounds trying to, get the right amount of gold, build farms so I could get gold to buy, units that I could then fight the monster with. And by the time I did, they had gotten all the way almost to my port. So, there was a little bit of frustration there, and I don't want to, overstate the degree to which that would happen in any particular game, but it did feel like there was a lot of things that were random enough that, like, how do you plan for that? If a monster could be across the board in one turn, what do you do to prepare yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's a feature and not a bug of the game, to be honest. I think that's intended to put the pressure on, and that's like if that almost wiped you out, and then it almost wiped me out, but we managed to deal with it. But that could have happened to someone else, and that game could have ended like 15 turns earlier by taking out somebody's port. And that's the way it's going to happen. The game is about doing a little bit of that economic growth and building up resources and trying to build up a military that will let you deal with most situations. But even if you're so prepared, you could just get a bad run of draws off the deck and have a monster that just like takes out half your forces.
Right.
So there's definitely an opportunity for you can prep the most you can, but a lot of it's just going to be dealing with the events that happen. And Chris, if the Great Old Ones came and attacked a continent, how do you really think they'd let you plan for it? Do you think it would be easy to just prep?
I think if the Great Old Ones came and started attacking my house, I wouldn't say, I need to go build a farm so that I can get some money, so that I can buy a gun, so that I can attack this guy who's at my front door right now. So
I feel like Chris has already planned for the Great Old Ones. He's ready. He's prepared. He's got all the setup he needs.
You guys are my Great Old Ones.
Let's move into the production of AuZtralia. We did play in Tabletop Simulator tonight, so we didn't play with the physical production. Did you guys look at the physical production? Do you have a good sense for how the game looks and feels and stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Chris, why don't you start? What are your initial thoughts? Anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I thought that this is where the game really shines. I thought the mechanisms let me down quite a bit in this game, but man, it sure did deliver in terms of the art and the production and the concept. I'm going to throw in there the theming as well. And I just thought that was an absolute blast. I think, Tim, you had made the point about how you thought that the sort of the story behind the game was really interesting, and it got me so engaged at the beginning of the game when I was still kind of down with the mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
I just found myself going, this is so much fun. It's so weird. It's so bizarre that we're exploring rural Australia and hoping we don't run into Cthulhu. And the production is part of that. I mean, the art is really, really interesting. It's really well done. I'm not even sure how to describe it, but I think you had said, Tim, something about Uncanny Valley with the characters and the art. I'm not sure if I would call it that, but it was definitely, there was a little bit of whimsy to it that I thought was very interesting. It doesn't have a lot in terms of there's no miniatures, I don't think, unless there's some upgrades you can get in the Kickstarter version or something like that. It's all chits, but the art is really cool. The board is really cool looking. It's a lot of fun to look at. And personally, I don't think that the cardboard nature of a lot of the pieces really harmed it that much. I thought that the art and the theming was enough to really carry it across the finish line.
I couldn't disagree more with you, Chris.
That's never happened before.
This game was put out by Stronghold Games, which is the production quality of Terraforming Mars, and to me this fits on a pretty much about the same level. I'm looking at this board right now, a picture of it on Board Game Geek, and honestly, it's the production that basically kept me away from this game for the last couple of years because the mechanisms always sounded interesting, always sounded fun and quirky, and just something I wanted to try. But the production is, like the board is just kind of dull hexes in 3 different colors. The chits are not high quality. The art, when I said Uncanny Valley, I meant that they don't look like real living human, like people at all. So I think that there's something to be said about the theming of the art, like the 1920s, like old World War One military vehicles fighting off against Cthulhu-ish monsters, and the monsters look cool, like they're fine. I don't love the art. I don't love the little cardboard chits, and I don't love that, there's just no table presence at all. The railways are bulky and ugly. You put these big, red pieces across the boards, and the farms are ugly, plain like things with abstract icons on them. And then the chits, yeah, they could be standees. They could be miniatures that come out when a monster comes, at least some of them, but it's just so dull and boring to me. It didn't bother me. I playing it, I actually really enjoyed it, but the production is something that's just definitely, for me, a turn off. I think, you definitely have a little bit more of a draw to the theme than I do, and that probably led to your interest in it a little bit more. But to me, I didn't see anything about the production that stood out as positive. What about you, Adam? What do you think of the production here?
I didn't mind it. I see what you're saying, Tim. It is pretty dull and kind of lackluster for some of the components, but the art on the cards, I think the art is pretty cool. Like I like the little character cards. They all have that kind of old-timey World War II-ish kind of look to them. Is that right? I don't even know what era they're going for here. Well, maybe World War One.
It's World War One. Yeah, it's the 20s. Yeah.
And maybe this is going a little bit out of scope here, but the new Kickstarter that comes out, they got this AuZtralia Revenge of the Old Ones and the Tasmania one. It's a little brighter. It comes off the table a little more. I know that's a different game than what we're talking about, but I think the art looks pretty good on those. So, a little bit of both. I can see the blandness and the chits and the Stronghold production coming through in its typical non-exciting fashion, but for what the game is and what you're paying for it, I think it's okay.
Okay, that's a glowing endorsement.
Not that I ever want to admit that Tim is right about anything, but I was thinking about what you just said, and I think you actually are right. I think that my impression of this game was pretty dramatically influenced by my great love of the Cthulhu mythos and this kind of alternate reality style game. And so I'm trying to look at it with fresh eyes, like if I wasn't a huge Cthulhu fan, if this didn't kind of hit all the right buttons for me in terms of theme, would I still feel the same way? And I guess I would say I stick by what I said about the art. I think the art is really cool, and I think it's impactful. But I see what you mean about the quality of the pieces, and this really could have used a few miniatures, and the board itself is actually the outside of the board. The stuff around the edges is more interesting than the actual board itself. So I can see what you're saying. So I would say that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, this sounds like a fascinating idea, it's going to be great. You're going to love that. But if you're like, oh, okay, that sounds like it might be interesting, then you may not be as blown away by the production as I was.
Yeah, I do want to say something really positive about the production, and that's the graphic design and the user interface here. I thought everything was super clear, really easy to read and understand how it worked and where things went, especially your player boards, which are supposed to be the ports, work really well. It's one thing we didn't talk about in mechanisms, so I'm going to touch on it briefly here, and that's the way you choose your actions on your turn. Basically, you have a pool of little action markers you can use, but there's like 7 or 8 spaces on your player board that you can move an action marker to and do the related action. The actions are really clear, so you move your token there, you know exactly what to do, and you know what the cost is going to be and the time cost and everything. When you take another action, if you move to the same space, you have to pay a gold for every action that you've taken there previously. So I did want to touch on that in the mechanisms, and I forgot to. I thought that was really clever. I liked the action selection mechanisms here. I thought it was better than your typical menu selection. Like, think of something like Cthulhu Wars as an example, where there's just like 8 different things you can do, and you're just using action points. And this was a little bit more restrictive, but it gave you the opportunity to reuse actions. But it's all spelled out because you're using these action markers to say what you're doing. I don't know. I just really like the way this worked. Kind of had like a blend of that action menu type of game, but also something like Scythe where you can't take the same action, 2 turns in a row. So it gave a little bit of a restriction or a penalty for trying to do the same thing over and over again. You had a benefit for moving out. Anyway, the player boards did a great job of representing those actions and showing you how they were available, where your military units would be, where they started, and when they were in combat, where they sat. Everything was really easy to use. The map was really easy to use. So regardless of how I felt about the art and just kind of the general look of it, I think usability wise, it worked out really well.
I want to piggyback on that too, Tim. The kind of the fun puzzle, one of the fun puzzles for me was trying to figure out which actions to use and kind of mapping that out in order to conserve the most gold or to be most efficient you could be with that without wasting a bunch of resources. So I want to agree. The action selection here was pretty neat and well done.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so any exciting moments in play today? I want to jump in on this one first because I have a moment that I really loved about halfway through this game where I was just like, I'm in love with this game because of something that was happening. Basically, Chris kind of hinted at it earlier in the game, but Chris and I were our railways were all intermixed up in the top eastern corner of the board. And we thought we were pretty protected because all the monsters that were coming up were down lower. But Chris decided to go and attack a level 2 monster, and it's this Shoggoth monster. It's a pretty big, for how prepped we were, it was pretty big. It had like 5 defense on it, and it was going to be worth 5 points if you defeated it. He went to combat, lost against it, and then it started moving around. And we kept drawing Shoggoth move cards, and it comes in and it blights Chris's farm. And I feel like I'm protected. Like there's 2 farms ahead of me. He blights Chris's second farm, and then all of a sudden, like, crap, there's like 2 of my farms here. There's 1 of Chris's. The next time he moves, it's going to go to one of our 2 spaces, depending on the direction indicator on the card. So he flips it up again, and it goes to Chris's. And I was like, oh my God, barely got protected. I picked up this action card that let me go and defend my farms, or it was one of the recruits, so that if I got attacked, I could defend my farms. The next card that comes up, it would have either attacked Chris's port or attacked the farm that was next to my port. So we were literally like, if it had attacked Chris's port and he hadn't been able to defend against it, the game would have ended, and it would have been this just like big epic ending. Well, it didn't. It went down and attacked my farm, and I was able to defend it off just before it was going to come in and it hit my port next. So it was like we were so close with this one creature, probably 10 turns into the game, where we could have just ended the game there. And it just felt like every card mattered. Every card that got flipped, whether it was the direction that it was going and whether we drew the cards during the combat that protected us, everything just mattered, and it was exciting, and everybody was on the edge of the seat at that point in the game. So I think this game has the potential to give those types of moments frequently, and sometimes you're gonna crash and burn. Like, they could be frustrating on the other side where somebody gets in that moment and just gets wiped out by the 10th turn and they're just out of the game. So that could definitely happen too. But in that situation, it was fun, and we managed to pull it off and hold things together, and the game went on. So I that was probably the biggest moment for me. What about you, Adam? Any moments that stood out to you in this game?
That was definitely one of the moments for sure, Tim. I saw that monster coming for the ports over there, one of the ports, and I was like, oh, I better just build some farms and like get some points. It's a point grab. What else can I do to get points while these guys get slaughtered over here? So that was fun. Like everything did matter. The end was coming, right? And it was like, and then it was like a pseudo climax. You guys turned him, cast him aside, and the game went on. So that was pretty neat. And then there was another point where I could have helped out Steve. There was a monster that was kind of coming for our farms. Was it going to go my way? Was it going to go towards Steve and start eating his corn or cows or whatever? So I could have gone and attacked and paid like 2 gold or something and been very resource tight for a few turns. Or I could have just built some farms and taken care of myself, and that's exactly what I did. And I think the monster ended up going and eating some of Steve's stuff, so it worked out pretty great. But just little quirky, fun moments like that are just pop up left and right. There was another moment. Again, I was looking at one of the cards up top. I talked about it earlier. I was like, well, I could just do this and then buy this card up here and get a whole bunch of points. And so I did like the one thing, and Steve's like, you know what, screw you. I'm just going to buy that card and get a whole bunch of points. So again, just a little flip-flop of momentum there, and Steve took that. And it's just little moments like that kept popping up, and it was pretty enjoyable. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I have to, I gotta say that it's the same moment that Tim talked about. And I mean, honestly, that was the seminal moment of the game. And that was like the most impactful. That was the climax. And unfortunately, it happened halfway through the game.
Yeah.
So, after that, it was kind of like back to pastoral, let's build farms and stuff like that. But I mean, absolutely, that moment, that few turns really captured what I would hope this game would be. And that was this excitement of, we're facing down the great old ones as they close in on our port, ready to end the game. And I mean, that was hugely exciting. So I wish that we had more of that. Interestingly, one thing that I'm not sure if there was a mechanism in there that would prevent this from happening, but it almost struck me that I would have done better off if I had gotten killed in the port, because as the game went on, I wasn't really prepared as well to sort of build out the farms and to do all the things you need to do to get the points. And so, relative to where you guys were in the game, I was actually better off at the time when my port was about to be attacked. And I was thinking to myself, you know, would I be better off getting killed now when my standing is better than it was? Now, there may be something in there that kind of takes points away from you if you're the first one who dies, or maybe you're just out of the game completely. I'm not sure, but and actually, that's a question. Is that a mechanism?
No, but the problem, I don't remember actually. Maybe you lose points if you don't have your port. I don't think so. The problem is though that the old ones would have won. Like we all would have lost basically if you just start following the scoring in the rule book. And that's an interesting thing here is that everybody can lose. You can have no winners in the game. And so that's what would have happened if you died at that point. Which sure, you would at least wouldn't have come in last place. You would have been tied for last with everybody, but you wouldn't have actually scored any better.
That's because there were so many face down monsters, which are worth double points. I think
points
at that
for
point
them. Yeah,
there was
right.
4 or 5 3-point monsters that were still face down.
And we all would have been at like 15 to 20 points, and they definitely would have beat us just based on all the monsters that are left on the board. The only reason why they weren't even in a running at the end of the game, actually they almost caught up with you, Chris, but the only reason they only got 15 points was because it was just for our blighted farms, but we cleared all the rest of the monsters off the board by the end. So
I like it. I like where your head's at, though. I could see how that would be a winning strategy at some point along the line there.
Once I'm dead, I just want to bring you guys down with me, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, if you're struggling, if you're behind, you kind of want the old ones to win and take everybody down with you. You don't have to listen to everybody gloat. You have to listen to Tim gloat for another week about how he won the game.
Seriously.
All right. Well, let's jump into the final question about AuZtralia, and that is, would you request to play the game again? Adam, why don't you start? I'm interested to hear how you feel about this.
I think I would. The right circumstance, I definitely would. This game, it did have those fun moments, and it's so quirky, and those decisions you get to make where, am I going to help myself out or try to help everybody else out? Those are really fun for me. So I like the little nods to screwing over your neighbor that are just so fun to me, or helping out your neighbor, and then maybe they'll help you out in the future, but probably not. So yeah, I would play this game again. It gave me a feeling that I don't think I've gotten from any other board game in recent memory. So very much, I would play this game again.
We didn't talk about one thing specifically, which we usually do when we talk about mechanisms, and that's where there's interaction. I'm not surprised you like it, Adam, because you love interaction in games. And so this is a game that gave you a little bit of opportunity to do some planning and build up and engine building and stuff, but there is so much interaction, not only with the old ones on the board, but also like, can I do this before Steve does? Or should I mess with that and help him out? Or just let him get slaughtered. Yeah, maybe it ruins the game for everybody if you let him get slaughtered because the old ones win, but it's kind of fun to let Steve just get slaughtered.
It's always fun to watch Steve get slaughtered. But depending on the meta too, you can, hey, if I help you out here, buddy, are you going to take care of me over here? Like you could get a little bit of that going on too. Yeah. And, nothing's for sure, but you can get some of that going. So that's kind of neat.
All right, Chris, what about you? What would you request to play this? Would you give it another shot?
Man, I honestly don't know.
Oh,
I went into this game really with high hopes, and I wanted so much to love it. And honestly, halfway through the game, I was thinking, this is so interesting and so exciting and so much fun. And there's so much stuff going on here that struck me as really unique and interesting that if you had asked me halfway through the game, I would have said, absolutely, I'll play it again as soon as we're done with this game. And then we hit, kind of phase 2. And by the end of it, I'm just like, God, I just want this to be over. And, Yeah, I will fully acknowledge that that may be because this game just happened to come out a certain way, and that maybe that wouldn't be the same way it was next time. I mean, maybe there really is enough variability that the game would be 180 degrees different. But it was enough of a drag to me that I'm not sure I'd be jumping out to play this one again.
Chris, that back half, you're absolutely right. It dragged so much, and that's crazy because it was like two totally different games. After that climax, it was it was a snoozer. If I could be assured that the game would be like that first half and then the second half would just go away, then that's a no doubter. Like I totally want to play it again. But if that threat of that second half, or if we could just like end it at the like 90-minute mark, all right, let's get out of here. This game's over. Let's go. So I don't know if there's a way to house rule that one. I don't know. So Tim, what's your thought on this one?
Well, we're not reviewing a house ruled version of AuZtralia tonight, but no, I you know what, I totally hear what you're saying there, and I think that this is a game that every once in a while you run into a game that really is hard to assess on a first play. And this is one of those games that is a challenge. There are a lot of games that have a very standard arc to them, and they may have good progression, but you kind of know, hey, this game is going to feel very similar every time you play it. I don't think that's the case here, so it's hard to assess. I think there's the potential for the game to struggle a lot of the time or cause major frustration or just bad luck ruining somebody's game. And I think that's the big downfall here. Would I request to play it again? Yes. I really like this game. I want to explore it some more. I want to see how it plays out differently. I want to like play with different strategies and different starting positions and see how the seating of the board changes things and like see what other cards are in the recruit stack. This was a fun play to me. And even though I also agreed that it dragged a little bit in the end of the game, that's also maybe a little bit with just how late it is, and those types of elements sometimes lead to this. And if this was an in-person play, I think it'd go pretty slick. And even if it wasn't super exciting at the end, I think it just turns would be going by a little bit quicker versus on Tabletop Simulator where we played it tonight. So I think the game is definitely worth exploring some more. But because of the opportunity for frustration and bad experiences, I think this would be a hard game to know that I could get out frequently with people. So I don't think this is a game that I would buy. I was after I read the rules today, I was really excited about it. I was like, man, I kind of wish I'd gotten in on that recent Kickstarter. After playing tonight, I really want to play it some more, but I don't think I want to spend a bunch on a big Kickstarter with blinged out stuff. This is a game you can find sometimes for $35 or $40 on, like on an online sale or whatever, because it's not high quality components. It's fairly normal size box, nothing too special about the production. So you can get it at a decent price. And maybe someday if I see it on sale, maybe I'll pick it up just to get a few more plays of it. I would love to play this at TimCon with the four of us, just in person, kind of bust out another game of this and see how it goes. But yeah, I'd love to play it again. I don't think I'll buy it, but I think it does enough stuff that's unique that doesn't feel like anything else in my collection. And so I think at minimum, it's got that going for it. I think you'd have to find the right group that would really enjoy it. So that'll wrap up our conversation on AuZtralia. We're going to talk about a few things we're excited about in gaming right after this. Welcome back. So let's talk about some things that we're excited about in the world of board games this week. Things that we've been playing or things that we've been thinking about or some new board game news. So let's start with you, Adam. Anything that's got you excited this week?
I continued my quest, my exploration of Kemet, Blood and Sand. The Kickstarter just came in and it looks pretty fantastic. Running through a few turns, three-handed solo, so me versus me versus me. And it looks like it's quick and snappy and fun, and the components are nice. And I think once we get that played, we are all going to enjoy it. So I'm excited about Kemet, Blood and Sand.
I have one big question for you. Player count there. Does it play two players also?
It does. It goes 2 to 5.
A lot of area control games are not great at two players. They can be still fun, but they tend to take away a little bit of the conflict. Do you think Kemet's going to fall in there where it's probably going to shine at 4 players?
I do. You can remove spaces. Basically, everyone's going to be packed in, and everyone's like so close and so accessible. You can reach out and start punching like right away. First turn of this game, people are already grabbing points, picking up big old minis, like building their pyramids. and it's pretty dynamic. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it doesn't feel chaotic. So from Cthulhu Wars, last few times I've been getting that sort of chaotic sense where what the heck's going on? And everybody can do all these crazy things. But with Kemet, you start with the same like battle cards, and you start with this little mini deck, kind of like the entry cards in Dune, that might be able to supplement either your regular action or during battle. You might be able to add some defense or some attack to battle. There's a bunch of ways to get points. You can control these certain temples that give you points. If you take control of that temple, then you take away that point from somebody. So it's kind of like the alliances in Dune Imperium. So there's points shift like that. If you are the attacker in a combat and you win and you have a troop left, then you get a point that can't be taken away. So there's ways that you keep points that stay there that are permanent, and there's points that shift. There's a part that's concrete, a foundation of points that you're going to have. And then these other sort of area control points that are going to bounce around from player to player as the game goes on. So you can try to focus if you want to do that, or if you can work your way at these tech tracks, you can buy points from those too, and those are other permanent points. So just the kind of the ways to get points, and it's not necessarily all you need to go fight. It does incentivize combat, it does incentivize the aggressor, but if you lose the combat, you don't get slaughtered, you're not out of the game. In fact, you might even have more troops left than the attacker after the combat is over if you're the defender. So there's ways. It's just cool. It's just a neat system, and it's very unique compared to any other troops on a map game that I've played, and I'm looking forward to playing it with real people.
One last player count question for you. Does it have a solo mode?
I don't think it does.
Okay. And that's fine. They typically, that's not unusual with area control games. Like, again, they benefit from multiple players, so I'm not surprised by that. I would love to find one sometime that actually does have a solo mode that plays well with a couple automa going on with it.
That's a good question. I don't know if there's any, like, area. I mean, Scythe has, like, a little bit of an automa, a decent automa going on with it, but I'm not aware of too many others that have a...
Yeah, it's a lot conflict lighter, though, than Scythe is, so... Yeah. All right, cool. Sounds awesome anyway. I'm sure this will be a fun one for our group. I got a couple things I want to chat about tonight. Number one is we're a little behind the curve here, but one of the hottest games from last year, Lost Ruins of Arnak, I finally got my hands on it. I got a copy this week and got the chance to open it up yesterday. First of all, this is exactly the type of colorful, vibrant production that I love. Gets me excited about board games. So from a production perspective, I opened the box, punched all these different cardboard shits, and there's great art on the cards. And when I said cardboard shits, there's these big like location tiles and the player boards and all this other stuff. I love that whole experience, but these are all beautiful and colorful and vibrant. Production looks really cool. It had a couple elements that were a little disappointing to me from a production perspective, like the meeples that everybody has are just these very plain basic color meeples, like red, blue, green, yellow, your typical old-fashioned meeples. They are chunkier and larger in size, and they got little fedoras on them. But I don't know, to me, they just felt a little bit outdated, a little old. And then they gave you some meeples for these little tokens that each player has.
Let's pause right there. Are they fedoras, or are they like the Indiana Jones hats? Like,
isn't that a fedora? Isn't that what a fedora is? An Indiana Jones hat?
I don't know. I think it's like a explorer, like recon hat or something. Chris,
I'm pretty sure that is a fedora.
Chris,
that
you're
actually easy there, youngster. Actually, for those who don't know, that actually is a fedora. Most people think of fedoras as those the little hats that the hipsters wear. That is actually a trilby. Fedora is what Indiana Jones wore.
Exactly.
Interesting. I'm getting an education here.
So yeah, no, I mean, that's fine. And then there's these little other wooden, each player has a magnifying glass and a little notebook, but they just give you little wooden tiles and then you put stickers on them. And I don't know, I don't love stickers on game components. I feel like they're going to fall off and wear or whatever. So it's not the end of the world. That's just a minor thing. But, for everything else that's in this box and all the content and everything, it's pretty well priced. So I don't have too much to complain about there. But I did read through the rule book. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but this game is right up my alley. It's exactly the type of like fun themed, but resource management, puzzly, how can I get one more resource to do this thing? And then, and I just comboed and did two more things there. This is exactly the type of game. So I know I'm going to love this game after reading through the rulebook and looking at the components. So I can't wait to play this. I'll be busting this out for at least a solo play later this week, but I'm pretty excited about it.
So Tim, I've heard it's a deck building worker placement. Is that correct? And then
It has both of those elements to it, and the obvious question is how does this compare to Dune Imperium? And I don't think it's going to be very much like Dune Imperium at all. To be honest, I think it's going to feel a lot more like Everdell in that it is a little bit of worker placement to do a couple things, but then once you start to build up some cards, the cards may be in your hand from your deck, or they may be locations on your player mat. You're just going to find different opportunities to get resources, and the deck building and the worker placement are just two different ways to do that. And that's kind of how Everdell is with the worker placement and the tableau building. It feels more like that than it does like Dune. So even though they use a couple of the same mechanisms, I don't think it's going to really compete from a mechanics perspective.
What's the gist of this game? You're like Indiana Jones in it, looking for some artifacts and going on these quests.
Totally,
and finding cool stuff.
That's exactly what it is. You're explorers. You just discovered this new island. So at the start of the game, there are locations on the board that require boots to get to. And so your basic starting hand of cards has some boot icons on there. Lets you put your workers out there and get the resources at those locations. But if you want to get further out and explore new locations, then you might need to get a car or a boat or a plane. And you'll have to do that by adding more cards to your deck or getting resources another way. They'll let you explore further and further. But anytime you explore a new location that hasn't been visited yet, you turn over a guardian, which is like a giant monster that's blocking that location. So you do get the resources that are on that location, but if you pull back your workers at the end of the round without defeating that guardian, you're going to get a fear card in your hand, which is going to be like a dead card in your deck, and it's going to be negative points at the end of the game. So you're kind of incented to go to that location not knowing what the monster is and have enough resources that hopefully whatever it is, you can defeat it. And then, so it's kind of cool. It's got that element to it. Yeah, but it's really just a fun-themed resource optimization game, and it's 100% Indiana Jones. There's also this cool track on the side. It's a couple tracks on the side of the board that as you do certain actions, you can move up these research tracks, and they give you different bonuses and kind of like tech trees. So, you can move up one, and you can either move up or to the right, and then once you're on the right, you got to move up that track. So you kind of have different choices about what bonuses you're going to get in future turns. You can really plan out the next few turns. Like if I can do this, and I can move up that track, that'll give me the resource to do this other thing, and then I can do this thing. Really fun, like puzzly little like combos, and just cool. Playing around with all the icons on the board and stuff. So that's the main thing I'm excited about. One last really quick thing. I know we're running long here. Beyond the Sun, an expansion just got announced. Rio Grande has been talking about it. Shut Up and Sit Down did an announcement, but I was following the threads on Board Game Geek. And so this is a game that we reviewed recently. You can check out our full episode on that. But Dennis Chan, I think, is the designer.
Yeah, I think Dennis K. Chan, yep.
Yeah, Dennis Chan is the designer on that. What they are adding to the expansion sounds like exactly what I wanted out of this. So I'm really excited about the expansion. They're going to be just putting more tech cards in the game for just more variability, kind of like more variable player setup. So some kind of like starting character that you start with, from what I understand. Leaders, that's what it is. And then a solo mode, which means that then I can get this and get it played some, even if I can't get a group together to play sometimes. And that's always important for me if I'm going to have a game in my collection. I want to be able to, if I'm really jonesing to play Beyond the Sun, I want to be able to pull it out on a Saturday night after my wife's gone to bed and bust it out. Yeah. So once that expansion comes out, I'll almost definitely be picking this game up because it's on my mind a lot. And every time I've played it, I've enjoyed it a little bit more. So that's what I got. Chris, what's going on for you this week? Anything you're excited about?
It is all about Kickstarter this week. I got my shipping notice for Terraforming Mars Big Box.
Oh, you got it. Nice. Oh, man, I'm the last one here. Darn it.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're going to get yours.
Good thing we didn't make that bet.
Well, you're going to get yours long before I get mine, because mine's going to Connecticut.
Oh, no.
It's the last of it's the last of my shipments that are going to my brother's house, since I had not yet moved into my house in Portland, where I am now, and it was too late to change the shipping address. So there you go. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited, and it'll be something to look forward to. I also got a shipping notice for Dimension Games' Twisted Fables, which is one that I've been looking forward to for a long time. It's this really cool-looking one-on-one combat game. I think similar in style to Unmatched, and it's really cool looking. I love the art in it. It's really it's just really wild looking. Dimension Games, I have not played anything of theirs. The only thing I know is that the stuff I backed on Kickstarter, but between this game and the upcoming Dawn of Madness, which is one that I've talked about on several episodes, I am just dying to put my hands on one of their games and start playing it and see what it's all about. And it's going to be a while before Dawn of Madness comes out, so this one will hopefully, wet my whistle while I'm waiting for the other one.
Can I tell you, I am really wanting to try one of these like 2-player tactical combat games. You're talking about that one, but unmatched, or even the Funko little Funko game combat one. Like I'm so tempted every time I'm in Barnes and Noble, they have unmatched there, and Target has the Funko ones, and I just want to pick one of these up. Chris, if I was still living, close to you a year ago, I would have absolutely picked one of these games up by now, because it'd be perfect opportunity for us. We got an hour. Let's bust out a quick, one-on-one game. But generally, I'm just, I'm not playing with people that want to do that one-to-one combat at this point. And if I'm getting with a bigger game group, it's going to be something that fits better with 3 or 4 players.
Right.
I haven't picked one up yet, but I think if I end up finding a local player here that's just like we're kind of regularly hanging out, just 2 of us, I'm gonna have to pick one of those up and try it out. How do you see yourself getting that played? Like, do you have someone that you think is going to be a good opponent for you with that type of game, or you're just like, whatever, I'll look at the cards and never play it?
The short answer is no. But then again, I just moved to a new town, so the world is my oyster. I suspect I'll find people to play games with now that I'm here, and I may very well find somebody who wants to play a game like that. Hey, if nothing else, it's something I can bring with me when I'm out visiting you guys, or we're all hopefully getting together in October, and we'll get a chance to play it then, and maybe then you can give it a shot and see what you think, and if it's something you'd want to invest in to play with your up and coming new game crew in Arizona. But it's one of those ones where it was almost so cool I didn't care. I know that's probably not an effective way to buy games, but there you go.
I may have 1 or 2 of those in my collection.
Is this a dark take on like fairy tale figures and they kind of fight it out, or what?
Oh yeah, it's a dark take on fairy tale figures, and it's very like a very dark thing, like Red Riding Hood is like a cybernetic assassin or something like that, and it's like awesome. it's that kind of thing. So it's a cool idea, and like I said, the art's really, really kind of neat. And I'm looking forward to seeing that, even if it's not something that I get on the table a whole lot. Speaking of art, my other thing that is big on Kickstarter for me this week, well, actually more like last week, was they wrapped up the Canvas reprint and expansion, and I'd heard you guys talk about it so much, and then I was looking at the art on it after I think the last time we had talked. I think it was on our art episode. And I was so blown away by it that I went ahead and bought it. It was actually one of the rare games that I was listening to our episode with my wife, and she said, I play that.
Nice.
And so I had to get that one.
Dude, it's a cool game. I was very tempted. And, I said that after we played it on our, that gaming weekend with Adam. We talked about on the podcast that, it's not my weight or style of game necessarily, so it's not something that I'm like getting excited to go back to. But for a game of that weight, it was super cool, and just the experience of playing with the components and putting those little pictures together was worth it. So I think you'll enjoy that. I think you'll get a kick out of it.
Yeah,
it's cool, Chris. I think you like it.
And I also think it's nice to have a couple of games of that sort of mid-weight, which I think is useful for if you have folks around who may not be gamers, and you want to bust something out and kind of show them something that's a little bit more of a little more heavyweight than the normal things that non-gaming enthusiasts would play. But it gives you an opportunity to get those games out a little bit and show somebody something a little bit different. So that was another one of the reasons why I thought that might be a good purchase. So lots happening in Kickstarter this week. Hopefully nothing comes up next week in Kickstarter, because I just can't afford to buy anymore.
All right, sounds good. Well, I think that will wrap us up for tonight. If you are interested in chatting with us about any of the games we talked about, or our opinions, or you want to tell Chris why he was wrong on any points, reach out to us on social media. You can hit us up on Twitter at BG_hot takes or Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. Until next week, take care, everybody.
And I'm never wrong. Good night.